Hey, before we jump into today's story, be sure you never miss another episode of 10-Minute Murder. To do that, all you have to do is follow the podcast on whatever app you're listening right now. It might say subscribe, follow, or collect, something like that. It depends on where you're listening. But hit that button and be a part of everything we're doing here.
10-Minute Murder contains depictions of actual crimes. What you are about to hear is real and violent in nature. Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, the brief and bingeable true crime podcast. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and I have the hiccups. I can't stop it, I've tried, so you're probably going to hear them in this podcast. Sorry. I did a Google search and tried to figure out a way to quickly get rid of them, and nothing seemed to work. They're not as bad as they were a little while ago. I gave it some time, and they're still there. I did it again. They're still there, but they're not completely gone. We're going to fight through it, though. I believe in us. The story today is a famous case that you're probably aware of, but if you're like me, you've forgotten some of the more disturbing details over the years. The story is about the murder of 5 children at the hands of their mother. I think it's a good case study in how far we've come in the treatment of mental health and hopefully continue to progress in the future. This happened in 2001, and I can't help but think that if it had happened more recently, she would have gotten the help that she needed, and 5 children would still be alive. This is the story of Andrea Yates. Andrea Yates was born in Hallsville, Texas, the youngest of 5 children of Judah Karen Kohler, a German immigrant, and Andrew Emmett Kennedy, whose parents were Irish immigrants. During Andrea's teenage years, she struggled with bulimia and depression, even talking to a friend when she was 17 about her thoughts of suicide. She graduated from Milby High School in 1982. She was the class valedictorian, swim team captain, and an officer in the National Honor Society. Yates completed a 2-year pre-nursing program at the University of Houston and graduated from the University of Texas Healthcare Science Center at Houston. From 1986 until 1994, she worked as a registered nurse at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. In the summer of 1989, she met Rusty Yates at the Sunscape Apartments in Houston. After dating for a short time, they moved in together and were married on April 17, 1993. Andrea and Rusty told friends and family, and basically anybody else they could tell that would listen, that they were going to have as many babies as nature allowed. That's a direct quote. They bought a 4-bedroom house in Friendswood, Texas. Their first child, Noah, was born February 1994, just before Rusty accepted a job offer in Florida. So they relocated to a smaller trailer in Seminole. By the time the birth of their 3rd child, Paul, they had moved back to Houston and purchased a GMC motorhome. After the birth of her 4th child, Luke, Andrea became depressed. It was a bit more than the postpartum depression, which is serious but also pretty common. On June 16, 1999, Rusty found her shaking and chewing on her fingers. The next day, she attempted to kill herself by overdosing on pills. She was admitted to the hospital and prescribed antidepressants. Not very long after she was released, she held a knife to her own throat and begged Rusty to let her die. Once again hospitalized, she was given a cocktail of medications, including Haldol, an antipsychotic drug. Her condition improved immediately, and she was prescribed Haldol on her release. After that, Rusty moved the family out of the little motorhome and into a small house for the sake of Andrea's health. She appeared to be somewhat stable after that, at least for the time being. In July 1999, Andrea suffered a nervous breakdown, which culminated in 2 more suicide attempts and 2 hospitalizations that summer. She was diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. Her first psychiatrist, Dr. Eileen Starbranch, testified later that she urged her and Rusty not to have any more children because it would pretty much guarantee future psychotic depression. But remember, they wanted to have as many children as nature would allow, and nature allowed them child number 5. She stopped taking the Haldol in March of 2000 to get pregnant and gave birth to her daughter, Mary, on November 30th, 2000. She seemed to be doing okay mentally until her father died on March 12, 2001. Andrea then stopped taking medication again, spiraled out of control, mutilated herself, and intensely started reading the Bible. She stopped feeding the baby, Mary. She became so incapacitated that she required immediate hospitalization. On April 1st, 2001, she started seeing a new doctor, Mohammed Saeed. She was treated and released. A month later, she degenerated back into a near catatonic state. Andrea had filled the bathtub in the middle of the day one day, and she later confessed to police that she had planned to drown the children on that day, but had decided against doing it then. She was hospitalized the next day after a scheduled doctor visit. Her psychiatrist determined that she was probably suicidal, thinking she filled the bathtub to drown herself. June 20th, 2001. Rusty left for work, leaving her alone to watch the children against Dr. Saeed's instructions to supervise her around the clock. His mother, Dora Yates, had been scheduled by Rusty to arrive an hour later to take over for Andrea. In the space of that hour, Andrea drowned all 5 children. In the weeks leading up to this day, he had been leaving her alone more and more. He told his family that this was on purpose, leaving her alone for an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening so that she didn't become so dependent on him and his mother for care. He told one family member that depressed people just needed a swift kick in the pants to get them motivated. After hearing that, it kind of makes me want to give him a swift kick to the head. Andrea started with John, Paul, and Luke. She drowned them and then laid them in her bed. She then drowned Mary, who she left floating in the bathtub. Noah came in and asked what was wrong with Mary. He saw that she was dead in the tub and then ran, but Andrea chased him down and drowned him too. She left him floating in the tub and laid Mary in John's arms in the bed. She then called the police, repeatedly saying that she needed an officer, but would not say why. She then called Rusty and told him to come home right away. Andrea Yates confessed to drowning her children. She said that she waited for Rusty to leave that day before filling the tub because she knew that he'd tried to stop her. She closed off the dog in another room just in case it tried to protect the children. During the trial, although the defense expert testimony agreed that Yates was psychotic, Texas law requires that, in order to successfully assert the insanity defense, the defendant must prove that they couldn't discern right from wrong at the time of the crime. In March 2002, a jury rejected the insanity defense and found her guilty. The prosecution had sought the death penalty. The jury refused that option. The trial court sentenced her to life imprisonment in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice with eligibility for parole in 40 years. But that is not where this story ends. On January 6, 2005, a Texas Court of Appeals reversed the convictions because California psychiatrist and prosecution witness Dr. Park Dietz admitted that he had given false testimony during the trial. In his testimony, Dietz had stated that shortly before the murders, an episode of Law and Order had aired featuring a woman who drowned her children and was acquitted of murder by reason of insanity. Author Suzanne O'Malley was covering the trial for New York Times Magazine and NBC. She had previously been a writer for Law and Order and immediately reported that no such episode existed. 2 years later, in 2004, Law and Order Criminal Intent did air an episode based in part on Andrea Yates' case. The appellate court ruled unanimously that the jury might have been influenced by Dietz's false testimony, and therefore a new trial would be necessary. On January 9, 2006, Yates again entered pleas of not guilty by reason of insanity. On February 1, 2006, she was granted release on bail on the condition that she'd be admitted into a mental health treatment facility. On July 26, 2006, after 3 days of deliberations, Yates was found not guilty by reason of insanity, as defined by the state of Texas. She was therefore committed to the North Texas State Hospital Vernon campus. In January 2007, she was moved to a low-security mental facility in Kerrville, Texas. Although psychiatrists for both Texas's state prosecutors and her defense lawyers agreed that she was severely mentally ill with one of several psychotic diseases at the time she'd killed her children, the state of Texas asserted that she was, by legal definition, aware enough to judge her actions as right or wrong, despite her mental defect. The prosecution further implied spousal revenge as motive for the killings, despite the conclusion of the defense experts that there was no evidence to support that motive. Although the original jury believed she was legally aware of her actions, they disagreed that her motive was spousal revenge. Rusty stated to the media that he was never told by psychiatrists that his wife was psychotic, nor that she could harm the children, and that had he otherwise known, he would have never had more children. This is in direct conflict with what multiple doctors have testified to. Andrea Yates told her prison psychiatrist that prior to their last child, she had told Rusty that she didn't want to have sex because Dr. Starbranch said that she might hurt her children. Rusty, she said, simply asserted his procreative religious beliefs, complimented her as a good mother, and persuaded her that she could handle more children. Apparently, Rusty was pretty confident during the trial that she would be found innocent and expressed the desire to have more children with Andrea once she was treated and released. Family, attorneys, and doctors eventually talked some sense into him until he joined reality. Rusty blamed Dr. Saeed, saying that he was the one responsible for recognizing and properly treating Andrea. In August 2004, Rusty filed for divorce, and it was granted in 2005. The following year, Rusty married again and had one son. His wife filed for divorce in 2015. While in prison, Yates stated that she had considered killing the children 2 years prior, saying that they thought she was not a good mother and claiming that her sons were developing improperly. She told her jail psychiatrist, "It was the seventh deadly sin. My children weren't righteous. They stumbled because I was evil. The way I was raising them, they could never be saved. They were doomed to perish in the fires of hell." That's today's 10-Minute Murder, the brief and bingeable true crime podcast. Thanks for listening today, and if you have a story you'd like for me to cover on this podcast, email it to 10minutemurder@gmail.com. Connect with me on social media. Be sure to tell your friends that are into quick true crime stories like this about 10-Minute Murder. And of course, if you are not subscribed already by now, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for listening to 10-Minute Murder. Have a good night.